Mike Huemer, is morality objective?
Yes. Yeah,
Good.
yeah. Maybe we should talk about what that means even. Um,
That's
it,
a good
yeah,
starting point, isn't it? What
yeah.
does it mean to say morality is objective? I haven't got a clue. Can you tell me?
I'm sure you have some clue. Yeah, it means something like it's independent of the attitudes of observers. When somebody says that an action is wrong, is it made wrong by the attitudes that observers have to that action, or is it wrong
Right.
independent to them? Okay, and the answer is generally it's independent of them. So if everybody approved of torturing babies, would torturing babies still be wrong? Yes, it would.
Right.
So it is independent. Now, there's sort of like a few different alternative views that people have, right? So some people think that this isn't even a matter of truth and falsity; that it's neither true nor false. There aren't any moral facts because when you say that something is wrong, you're not even really making a claim about the way anything in the world is. You're just like expressing your feelings or something like that. Okay. So for morality to be objective, there have to be facts. There have to be some truths that we're talking about.
Right.
Another alternative view is that, well, there are truths in question, but they're made true by our attitudes. So when you say something is wrong, you're just saying something about our attitudes, like you're saying it's prohibited in our society. Baby torture is wrong means our society prohibits baby torture, or maybe it means I, the speaker, am against baby torture, or something like that. And notice that those things are in fact true, right? Both of those are true.
Right.
So it wouldn't be a question of whether there's a fact or not, but it would be whether it's independent of us. Okay. And then the other alternative view is that these are all just false. Like nothing is right or wrong.
Right.
So when you say it's wrong, that's just false. That doesn't mean it's permissible, though, because that would be another moral property. So,
Mm.
so
Right. So you're opposed to the subjectivist view that moral truths are kind of ultimately in some complicated way rooted in our preferences. You're objected to the sort of nihilist view, or the technical term is error theory, that there are no moral truths or they're all false. You believe there are real objective moral truths out there independent of us. Why the hell do you think that?
well, I mean, one reason is that the alternative views are all no good, right? And part of that is, well, it just seems obvious that some things are wrong. So, like, should you burn babies just for the fun of it? Should you do that? It seems obvious that that's wrong. And then when you think about, okay, does that depend on our attitudes? Well, it looks like that comes down to, well, if you're in a society in which they approve of that, should you do it? And the answer is obviously no. I didn't think that it's just like obvious on the face of it. Okay, so it looks like there's a moral truth that's independent of our attitudes. So it looks like obviously there's an objective moral truth, and this really doesn't like it's in a way surprising that this would be this would be controversial because it, like who doesn't see this?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what, Mike? You know what might help the listeners get a sense of where you're coming from is to maybe say something a little bit about your kind of general view of knowledge and what justifies our states of knowledge. So the view
Yeah,
known as, did you come up with this term, phenomenal conservatism? Or
yeah,
was that a term was about? Anyway, you're quite
yeah.
well known for adopting this view. And I think, when you're saying things like, it seems true, I think people might think, well, what the hell does that matter if it seems true? We look to science or experiments to tell us what reality is like, not just, it seems true. But I think, so to make sense of where you're coming from there, maybe we need to
Yeah,
bring in this phenomenal conservatism view. Could you tell us
yeah,
a little bit about that?
yeah. Phenomenal conservatism, I call it. Yeah, I
Oh,
came up with
sorry,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I came up with that term in my 2001 book, which was about skepticism and the veil of perception, which was about how we know about the external world. Because there's just a general question about how we know anything. Okay, now it's usually thought in epistemology that to know something Well, you have to at least believe the thing, and it's got to be true, and you have to have a justification. You've got to be justified in believing it, or it has to be reasonable or rational to believe, or something like that. And then maybe there's some additional conditions after that. Um, but the main thing that people ask about is how our beliefs are justified. If somebody's wondering how we know something, they're probably wondering how it's justified. Okay, so and okay, and that's the thing that people have wondered about all kinds of beliefs, right? And it goes back to, like, the ancient skeptics who would say that we couldn't even know about the things that we were directly observing at the moment, right? And maybe we couldn't know anything, including the claim that we couldn't know anything. We couldn't even know that, right? Um, okay, and then my general answer to this is that, well, it's rational to assume that things are pretty much the way they appear, unless and until you have specific reasons for doubting that. So, and the way things appear. Well, so I think there's a type of mental state that you have known as an appearance or seeming, which you're reporting when you say it appears that such and such, or it seems that such and such. This includes sensory experiences. So, like, it appears that there's a table in front of me. When I say that, I'm reporting an experience that represents there to be a table, which in this case is a visual experience. Okay, but also there are other kinds of appearances where, let's say, you think about an action of somebody burning babies, and that seems wrong, not
Mm.
by the five senses, but by this other cognitive faculty, right? We could call this ethical intuition. You have a sense of the wrongness of it. Okay, and this is just like everything, every belief that you form when you're, let's say, trying to figure out the truth, when you're seeking the truth. Every belief that you form comes down to the way something seems to you. There really isn't any other alternative, right? Like, oh, relying on science. No, that relying on science is not an alternative, right? Like, where do the
So
scientists
just
get
ju-
belief?
just fill that in a little bit for the audience. Why is that not an alternative? Why can't I just say no? I'm just going to trust science. Tell me what reality's like, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, you're saying, okay, so I'm going to listen to the things that the scientist told me, because that's what it actually means in reality, right? And actually, not even the scientists, like the people who wrote science textbooks. I'm going to listen to what they said. Okay, and whatever, the magazine articles and stuff that I found. Okay, and yeah, and how did they know anything? Where did their beliefs come from? Where did the scientists get their beliefs from? Okay, and they're like, and then you say, oh well, they made some observations. Yeah, and how did they know that the observations were true? Okay, what is making an observation? Making an observation is having a sensory experience, which hopefully was caused by real things in the world. But the only way that you would know that it was caused by things in the real world is you assume that things are the way they appear, unless and until you have specific reasons for doubting that. If you don't do that, then you have no idea what is going on in the external world. If you don't if you don't start by assuming that things are the way they appear, then you can't make any observations, right? Like, because you don't know whether everything is a dream, or whether you're a brain in a vat, or whatever. And so you don't know whether any
Yeah,
of the observations that the scientists make are valid, right? By the way, you wouldn't know whether any of your memories were true either. So if you
yeah.
made the observation yesterday, you have no way of knowing whether you really made it, or whether, other than by trusting your memories and just assuming that what you seem to remember is what happened, unless and until you have specific reasons for doubting that. And I'm putting that phrase in there because I'm not saying that your memory is always reliable, or that observation is always reliable. There's nothing that human beings do that's infallible. You can acquire reasons for thinking that it's gone wrong, but you start by assuming that it's gone okay until you have reasons for thinking that it's gone wrong. If you don't do that, then you have no way of getting anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm very sympathetic to everything you're saying. I wonder whether this is good for a podcast or bad for a podcast. I think there's going to be a lot of agreement today, but let's see how it
Mhm.
goes. But yes, I'm not sure whether I'm totally signed up to every detail of your phenomenal conservatism. Apologies for getting the name slightly wrong earlier, but I'm certainly in agreement with something very similar. And the way I think of it, and and I suppose try to justify it is, you know, what are you supposed to do? The human knowledge situation is far from ideal. All you can do, I think, is just start with what seems most evident. um, things I guess that are most evident are two things, right? Mathematics and logic. 2 plus 2 is 4. Just seems like it has to be true. And one's own consciousness, right? Your own pain you're feeling right now. It just seems undeniable that it exists. So they're the things that seem incredibly evident to the point of maybe certain or close to certain.
Yes.
But you can't just stop there, right? You can't just stop there because you'll be left with skepticism. I think it's an important point you raised there about memories, because, when we talk about skepticism, I find people sometimes say, oh, well, we've got reason to believe in an external world because our experience is so regular and structured. So we postulate an external world to make sense of that, to explain that. But hold on, you're trusting your memories, right? All you have immediate direct access to is the Cartesian present moment, your own consciousness right now, and the fact that you seem to remember things, but what justifies trusting them? Um, so we have to move beyond what's just totally certain. I do want to move to trusting your senses. It does
Yeah.
seem to be true, but maybe there are other things. There are other things that seem as true as there's a table in front of me. And maybe this is the way into the morality case. This is, so
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, did you want to
Well,
say something then?
well, yeah. So, I mean, when people think about moral intuitions or something, um, there's a tendency to focus on controversial moral issues, like,
Yeah.
the issue of abortion, and then, do potential persons have rights? Okay, so, like, persons have a right to life. Does a potential person have a right to life? Because it's going to become a person later. And then maybe you could have some intuitive reaction to that, and then different people will have different intuitive reactions to that. Okay. Um, but then there are other moral issues that are not controversial, and therefore we never talk about them. And therefore, when you say ethical intuition, people don't think about them, right? But, like, no, like, you see a child on the street, should you just walk up to him and punch him in the face just for fun? Should you do that? That's not controversial. And therefore, people don't think of that as a moral issue, and therefore they don't think of it as an intuition. Okay. But there are things like that I would say are extremely certain and that nobody really has doubts about, right?
Mm.
Okay,
Do you know
so
the things that makes the intuitions, the value seemings that seem most evident to me are actually not the moral case. Because the moral case is so bound up with emotion, it sort of seems somewhat plausible to me that, okay, maybe we're projecting our emotions. We're so horrified by murder and suffering. Maybe we're projecting our emotions. The value seemings that I find harder to deny, in fact, and I'm curious to know what you think of this, are more aesthetic ones. Certain experiences of beauty. Over the Christmas break, I was enjoying Beethoven's late string quartets, and feeling
yeah.
deeply moved and feel. Here's my seeming experience in this case, listening to this music. It really seems like I'm encountering value. I'm encountering something deep and profound. It's not just my preference. Oh, I like it. Maybe you don't. If someone says, I think it's rubbish, Beethoven's late quartets. I think it's there's nothing. I would say you are bloody wrong. You are not seeing something
Yes.
real and objective. Now, something you could get maybe from other places too, of course, but there is some depth here. And if you don't see it, it's something akin to the way blind people can't see objects in their environment around them. So they're the seeming intuitions that seem most evident to me. I don't know what you think
Well,
about that.
I mean, it's hard to compare, different appearances that are all completely obvious. I suspect that you're having this reaction because you've just been exposed to too many moral philosophers talking about ethics and like including meta ethicists talking about, well, is it really objective? Are there really moral values or something like that? If you spend too much time thinking about it abstractly, then you can start to feel like there are doubts or something. But and also like if you thought about something for too long, you stop having the experience of the appearance, right? So like when I think about 2 + 2
Yeah.
equals 4, um, and I think, oh, that's really obvious. But what I'm doing is not really intuiting it now. What I'm doing is just remembering that. I just know that. Like I've known that 2 + 2 equals 4 for whatever 50 years. So I don't, when I think about it now, I
Yeah.
don't have an experience of seeing the truth of it. I just remember it and I don't think about it. Okay. So anyway, so if I, so to kind of invoke your experience of intuition, I have to raise a proposition that you haven't thought about. So yeah, okay. So
Okay.
compare Beethoven to Baby Shark Dance. I have a blog post in which I mentioned this. Baby Shark Dance is one of the most watched videos on YouTube of all time. It's like it's got
Uh-huh.
billions of views, and it's this like children's whatever little musical piece. Baby Shark, da, 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 da,
Yeah,
baby.
yeah. I know it well. I got little kids, so I know this very, very well, sadly.
And it's extremely repetitive. Okay, so yeah, the question: which is aesthetically better? Whatever Beethoven or Baby Shark Dance. And if somebody thinks, yeah, I think Baby Shark Dance wins. Like maybe your kids would say that, right? Um, that person
They
is
wouldn't
wrong.
dare. They'd be in trouble if they even tried to say that.
Yeah. Although like they might not even understand the question, like which is
Yeah.
aesthetically better. But okay. Okay, but is that more obvious then? Okay, so like you have a hungry child and the child is crying because it's hungry, and like you have a bottle of milk that you could give, and the baby you give the baby. So you want the baby to stop crying. You could give it a bottle of milk, or you could throw it out the window. Which one is better? Okay, and if you have trouble figuring out which one is better,
Yeah.
then something wrong with you. Um,
Just your baby shark example has reminded me. I used to have a friend who had a very sort of posh and proper English father who used to be very sort of quite studious and very serious individual, and he was always in his study in his house, quite a big house, and we snuck into his house one day, and in a drawer in his desk was a CD of Barbie Girl. I'm a Barbie girl. Do you remember that? In a Barbie world. And I don't know, that was just quite revealing people's secret passions. But yeah, well, just to clarify, it's not that it's not that I only believe in the aesthetic value, and I don't care about morality or empathy, like some kind of Hannibal Lecter figure or something. Uh, I
that's
suppose what it is to me. I mean, I actually had quite a radical conversion during my graduate studies, actually, to a robust form of value realism. I went to Reading, University of Reading, where there were a lot of moral philosophers like Jonathan Dancy and Brad Hooker. Jonathan Dancy is the mother-in-law of Claire Danes, the star of Homeland, just in case people.
right.
Uh, and if you go on YouTube, he's on one of these big Saturday night US chat shows because they thought they'd get him on because he's Claire Danes' father-in-law. I just kind of imagine them sitting around Sunday dinner, Sunday lunch table. Anyway, I'm digressing.
Yeah.
Um, Pause while I remember what my chain of thought was. Uh, um, Oh yeah, so I had quite a radical conversion, and I think the starting point was these something like these kind of experiences of encountering value, or also a sense that some things are more worth doing than others, right? I mean, if you imagine someone who's dedicated their lives, I talk about this in my Why book, someone who's dedicated their lives to counting blades of grass right? They
Mm.
they sweat and they toil and they cheat just to count as many blades of grass as they possibly can, and they don't even like it. Right? They don't get any joy from it. It's just the fundamental life goal.
That's what they think they should do.
That is that is pointless. That is tragically pointless. So I suppose that was
Right.
what finally got me out of the
Yeah.
picture that we
Which
get
is
from
why.
David Hume, that all life goals are equal, rationally speaking. Hume
Yeah. Yeah.
famously said, reason is slave of the passions.
Yes.
And I was convinced by that as a young man, as a foolish young man. But then thinking about this, well, is dedicating your life to counting blades of grass when you don't even enjoy it, is that equally valuable to, you know, trying to cure cancer or advance scientific knowledge or just have a quite nice, pleasant life for you and your family or something?
Yeah.
And I suppose that's what broke me out of the David Hume picture. And once you're in the realm of believing in value and trusting your value seemings, then I had no problem with accepting the moral seemings, like, let's not throw babies out of windows and so on. But it
Yeah.
was that way in was important for me.
Oh, I see. So, I mean, a while ago you mentioned, which I didn't comment on, forgot to comment on, like, oh, people might think that when you're making moral judgments, you're projecting your emotional reactions or something like this. I was a little bit surprised that you said that by way of introducing aesthetic realism, because people would
Mm,
have the same thought about aesthetic judgments. Um, okay, but like if you're worried about that, we can raise value judgments that are not particularly emotional. So, like, there are abstract value judgments that appear obvious in much the same way that many other abstract necessary truths appear obvious. Okay, so there's the connection between suffering and welfare. So it appears that suffering decreases welfare. Right? Other things being equal, suffering is bad for you. Suffering is a harm. Okay, and then here's another. And by the way, it's not completely obvious whether that is a value judgment already, because it's not totally obvious whether harm is a value term. Okay, but anyway, yeah. Here's another thing. Welfare is other things being equal. Welfare is good. So that is, it's bad to be harmed. Harm is bad. Other things being equal. Okay, and then here's another judgment. Other things being equal, you should avoid causing bad things. And so, like, all of those look to me like self-evident necessary truths, and these are self-evident in much the same way as the judgment that nothing can be completely red and completely green, right? Which is like a famous example of a priori necessary truth. Okay, but when you put those three things together, suffering decreases welfare. Welfare is good. You shouldn't cause bad things, or a decrease in goodness, other things being equal, then you get a clearly normative judgment, right? Which is that you shouldn't
yeah.
cause suffering, other things being equal. Okay, and so then it looks like that's just an obvious necessary truth. And right, and
Yeah,
not
yeah, that's a
right.
really
It's
good
not like,
example.
oh, I'm just projecting my emotions right now. It
Yeah.
seems like that's self-evident.
I suppose a lot of people are open to the idea that when it comes to the suffering of others, there's no objective right or wrong. It's if somebody is a horrible, cruel person who doesn't care about other people, we might not like that, but there's no objective, rational thing we could do to persuade them. So when they're thinking about the pleasure and pain of others, your obligations to others, people think, oh, there's no fact of the matter. But if you're going to be consistent, follow through that there are just no facts about value at all, no facts about reasons, then you have to be consistent and do it about your own pleasure and pain as well. That, the fact that something feels awful to me gives me no reason to avoid it. The fact that something feels wonderful gives me no reason to go for it. Um, and that does just seem completely wild. And so, I mean, that was an important part of it for me, realizing value claims are just bloody all over the place. I mean, including value claims about evidence. You ought to follow the evidence. You ought not to believe contradictions and so on. And it really is very hard, if not impossible, to sustain an out and out error theory of not believing there are any truths about value. I mean, a nice way of making this point vivid, think about Bart Stromer, who's an influential nihilist, if you like, someone who thinks there are no truths about value. He's happy to say, strictly speaking, he can't believe his own view because he thinks to believe something, at least to believe it reflectively, you have to take yourself to have a reason to believe it. But he doesn't believe in reasons. He doesn't think there are, reason is a sort of value notion. What you have reason to do, what you have reason to believe. So what he ends up saying is the arguments point in that direction. So that's a kind of vivid way of realizing how
Well, I
radical
mean, that
the nihilist position is.
arguments point in that direction might be a normative judgment too, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
pointing.
So
It's not physically
yes,
pointing. So, yeah, good. So, I mean, I'm not sure if everyone in the audience will get this point. Like, why wouldn't somebody just be skeptical about moral judgments and not uh, everything
yeah,
else, right? So, and the thing to point out is, well, the arguments for skepticism about morality apply to all normative judgments. Okay,
yeah,
so like the most popular thing I think for moral skeptics to say is, "Oh, moral properties are weird because they're supposed to motivate you independent of your desires. They produce categorical reasons, as they say." So,
yeah,
yeah, okay. Oh, that's also true about epistemic reasons, right? Like it's irrational to believe a contradiction, even if you want to. So that's right. That's a norm that's independent of your desires. So, okay, there are no categorical reasons. So there are no categorical epistemic reasons. So then, like, you just believe anything that you want to, and like that's equally rational, or maybe there are no facts about rationality, right? Which, by the way, this was actually Hume's view, right? Like as
mm,
stated, um, it looks like as stated, his view was there is no such thing as a rational or irrational action. Right? Behavior
right, yeah,
cannot be reasonable or unreasonable. Today, the people who call themselves Humeans, that's not their view. Their view is an action is rational or irrational depending on how well it serves the person's actual goals or something
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
that. Okay,
And then
but
you're sneaking in a value claim there, aren't you? You're sneaking in a value claim that you ought to follow your desires. You ought to, do
yeah,
what's going to maximize desire satisfaction. But that's also a value claim you've sneaked in. I think that's often not noticed. Yeah,
yeah,
go
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. Like Hume was more consistent, right? He realized that there was
Sure.
no basis for distinguishing rational from irrational
So
actions.
just on that point, then, Mike, you probably know this. What you probably know Hume's view better than me. So when he says reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions,
Yeah.
what do you make of that word ought there? Because that sounds like a value claim.
Uh, I don't know. I need to look up that passage. It's a very famous passage, but I need to look that up again to see
Okay.
what's going on. Um,
Don't worry, don't
but
worry.
there's
I
that.
interrupted you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that famous passage where he talks about how, it's not irrational to prefer the destruction of the world to the scratching of my finger. And
Sure,
then
sure.
right after that, there's this remark that it would also not be irrational to prefer my total ruin to the least
Yeah, yeah.
discomfort to an Indian or a person completely unknown to me. An Indian is just used as an example of somebody who has nothing to do with you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Well,
okay,
he was
so,
also horrifically racist, wasn't he? What's his line saying? Oh, there was supposedly some person of color. No, he didn't use the word person of color, but let's
yeah,
use the word. There's some person of color who they say is intelligent, and he says probably he just knew a few clever words like a parrot. That was anyway.
right.
He was
That,
horrifically racist,
I mean,
but
everybody was racist anyway in the
yeah, yeah,
1700s. But okay,
perhaps so.
um, but yeah, like what's going on in that passage. So it's like people frequently quote the first part and then don't quote the second part, but both of them are important, right? And they're both
Mm,
there so that you don't think that he's saying what's rational is to serve your interests. He's saying nothing is rational or irrational. You
sure,
can do
sure.
anything. And there's like actions cannot be reasonable or unreasonable. Okay, and like,
Yeah,
and I take that to be a crazy position, right? But
right,
anyway,
right.
that's where you get to if you're if you're skeptical about value, because reasonable and unreasonable are evaluative terms. Like
Sure, sure,
reasonable is
sure.
positive and unreasonable is negative.
Okay, so I am very sympathetic to everything you're saying. Maybe there's perhaps a sliver of disagreement. I don't know. Let me lay out how I think of it. So you said at one point there you think it's some of these value claims are self-evident, and maybe you're thinking that they're like the truths of logic or mathematics. I wouldn't want to go that far. Here's how I think of it. Right, I think the most evident things are mathematics, logic, and my own consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Then let's put on the table the evidence of your senses. There's a table in front of me, right? I think of value judgments, or certain value judgments, like the profundity of Beethoven's late string quartets, or counting blades of grass for your entire life is pointless. Those value judgments, I would put them in between evidence from the senses. There's a table in front of me, and 2 + 2 is 4. It seems easier for me to doubt that there's a table in front of me, because I can quite easily get in the mindset of, oh, maybe I'm in the Matrix.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
seems easier to doubt than you know the, it's
Well,
pointless. It's pointless to count. Sorry, it's pointless to count blades of grass. But it
I
doesn't. But none of these value judgments seem to me as evident as 2 + 2 is 4. So yeah, I'm curious whether you agree on that. But I think this is important. Just a final point on this, because so then every time I'm talking to value anti-realists of whatever brand, they want to say, well, it could just be a delusion. It could just be, even if you have this deep intuition, how do you know it's false? But then if I'm going to trust my senses, right? And there's something here that seems to me more evident than the deliverance of my senses, I'm going to trust that as well. So that's
yeah.
how I kind of make sense of the rationality of my value realism. Anyway,
Right.
over to you. What
Yeah.
do we
Good.
disagree,
Yeah.
or do we just agree?
I mean, this might be, um, it might vary depending on your maybe personality type, maybe intellectual personality type. So I suspect that some people would think the judgments, the perceptual judgments, are more obvious, but the people who would be saying that would probably not be philosophers.
Right,
It's
right.
philosophers who find it impossible to doubt the things that they intellectually perceive, like mathematical truths, and easier to doubt the evidence of the senses. Um, but okay, but you know, speaking of mathematical judgments, I once heard a talk by, I think this was Mark Gallagher, but a philosopher who was saying that mathematical judgments are false. So like 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, and the reason
Right,
for this
right.
is that it's a statement about an object called two, and he thought that two doesn't exist. The
Uh-huh,
numbers
uh-huh.
don't really
Okay.
exist, and they would have to exist for these statements to be true. Okay, so the thing is, like, if you get philosophical, then you can doubt almost anything, including judgments in
Right, right.
mathematics, which is similar to the fact that you can doubt moral judgments if you turn to metaethics, right? But if you're not getting metaethical and you're not doing this abstract philosophical reflection about the nature of ethics, if you're just sort of like um, playing the ethics game normally, like playing the
Yeah,
mathematical game normally, then it's unquestionable that you shouldn't torture babies for fun. Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
like that's as central as 2 + 2 is 4. Like a person doing normal mathematics is not going to come up with the answer that 2 + 2 is 5, and a person doing morality is not going to come up with the answer that torturing the babies is good.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just on your anecdote reminded me of the anecdote of the professor who said, there are two departments in a university that don't have any subject matter: theology and mathematics. This is a very philosopher's joke. So if you deny the existence of abstract objects, you're going to think mathematics has no subject matter. There's no such thing as numbers and sets and functions. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're an atheist, anyway, that wasn't the best joke I've ever told. But yeah, I mean, you say people have to get philosophical to deny moral truths, but it does seem to come quite naturally, doesn't it, to a lot of people, to a lot of teenagers, to a lot of undergraduates. It's not like
Yeah.
You have to do a hell of a lot of philosophizing to get into this space where you're doubting moral truths, even the most evident seeming moral truths. But so what do you think this is? Do
Yeah.
you think this is just intellectual corruption, that people are too influenced by existentialists or something, or what's going on there?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think this is special to our culture, right? I think in most cultures throughout history, it would have been crazy to doubt the reality of moral truths, right?
Right, right,
Although also most cultures in history have had very bad, very bad understanding of what the moral truths were, right? So like they could get the one about the babies right, that you should not throw babies into the fire, at least not your own babies. But they were right that you shouldn't like murder other members of your tribe just for fun. They got that one, but they didn't quite
right,
understand that you shouldn't attack other tribes just
right,
to
right, right.
just to take their stuff. Um, so anyway, okay, but yeah, um, yeah, something happened. Maybe philosophers and literary figures have sort of infected the culture too much. And if you just spend enough time questioning something, then it can start to seem questionable. Like you're just like
Hmm.
expressing doubts or just asking why we should believe the thing. And like, that would happen to the external world, except most people don't do that. Right. But if you start reading Descartes and then you start thinking, oh, yeah, how do I know that I'm not dreaming? Then you can get in this mindset where it seems like you don't really know, you don't know anything.
I guess I'm inclined to think, we're going through a phase of history where people are just so blown away by the success of science, the incredible, obviously rightly celebrated success of science and all the technology it's produced, that leads people to think, this is it. This is the only source of truth, and everything else in contrast seems sort of intangible. And so I think maybe that's what's going on. People just have this implicit thing that, look, the only way to find out about reality is from experiments,
Yeah.
and running with that, and then of course, okay, then you can see why either moral truths are not real, or all false, or maybe they're just preferences or something. But once you think through the epistemology a bit, it does seem that we have to accept that there are ways of knowing independent of science. I mean, knowing about your own consciousness, knowing about the truths of mathematics and logic. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
do seem on the face of it, it's at least debatable that there are ways of knowing
Yeah.
that come apart from science. And once you're in that ballpark, then what's so suspect about moral truths? I don't.
Mm.
So do you think that's something
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
going on? The religion of our times, scientism.
Yeah. 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 Scientism, this sort of exaggerated respect for the physical and biological sciences, and a corresponding disparagement of all other areas of human intellectual endeavor. That's what we call
Yeah,
scientism. And I mean, partly this is just like a psychological phenomenon that the sciences were really successful, and then
yeah,
ethics and philosophy they don't look like the sciences, so then they get decreased prestige, and then there's just this sort of emotional reaction that you feel like you're being hard-headed and scientific if you start being skeptical about them. Okay, but then there's okay, so like the way to respond to that just psychological phenomenon, I guess, is just to point it out and to point out that you're being
yeah,
irrational, because in fact it is not scientific to form beliefs in this way. Right, like rejecting some other field because it doesn't resemble a field that was successful.
yeah,
um
yeah, yeah,
that's not scientific. um okay, but then you might think, oh well, there's an intellectual critique, like, okay, we know that science is reliable, and like ethics and philosophy have not proved themselves to be reliable. um and like there's a point to this. Like you can make technology based on our scientific theories, which achieves very specific and very difficult to achieve results, which could not have been achieved by anyone who didn't have those theories, right? Like very obviously. And like there's nothing that you can do based on philosophical theories that people who don't know those theories can't do. Right? Okay, but what I do want to say, like,
mm,
just to respond to the, I guess, like, if there's an intellectual argument that, oh, only the scientific method is reliable, I would like to point out that, well, there's a sort of misunderstanding of what science is and what the scientific method is. that was like maybe introduced by Francis Bacon, and and the empiricists, that science is just all empirical. There's only empirical input. There's only input from observation, and that's just completely wrong, right? And what you need to realize is that there is a priori input into scientific reasoning, right? So there's obviously the mathematics and logic, you know, and that's a priori. But there's other sort of intuitive judgments. So like the people in philosophy of science widely recognize that theory is underdetermined by data. So there's a set of data. There's always more than one theory that explains it, and then scientists make judgments, which often are not actually stated. It will be implicit, but like there will be a theory that's preferred. And in fact, there will be many, like maybe infinitely many other theories that could explain the data, but that are not even considered because they would be considered ridiculous if somebody raised them. Okay. But like what if we revived Ptolemaic astronomy and we added more epicycles, and then we can we can sort of like
Yeah, yeah,
cover the phenomena with enough epicycles, and then people would just think that that's ridiculous. So they don't talk
yeah,
about it because it's
yeah,
ridiculous, but that the ridiculousness, that's an intuitive judgment, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and they would
Simplicity, I
say,
suppose,
yeah, they say,
appeals to
oh,
simplicity.
yeah, but like, okay, well, why do we think that this the simplest explanation is most likely to be true?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's just like an intuitive a priori judgment. And that has to be a priori because you need things like this. You need criteria for theory choice in order
Mm,
to make empirical, in
yeah,
order
yeah.
to like confirm empirical theories.
Yeah, a nice example where simplicity maybe did make a difference in the history of science is with special relativity. So my understanding is, the Lorentzian view that preceded it was empirically, observationally equivalent. In fact, Einstein nicked Lorentz's maths. Um, it was just that Einstein had a much simpler hypothesis, right? So Lorentz had all these sort of ad hoc postulations to make sense of the fact that it always it always seems as though the speed of light is constant in all frames of reference. There's kind of things balancing it out to make that false appearance. And then Einstein says, well, maybe it is the same in all frames of reference. Now that has all the counterintuitive implications of time slowing down as you get faster. Maybe that's why Lorentz sort of didn't think of it, but it was much simpler. So that's an example where it was two observationally equivalent hypotheses, where it's just simplicity that makes a difference. And as you say, that value judgment that simpler theories are better, more likely to be true, that's not something that's sort of you demonstrate with an evidence. You
Yeah.
demonstrate with an experiment. It's some sort of more intuitive a priori judgment. But yeah,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So like, it's a criterion for interpreting the evidence, right?
yeah,
That the simplest explanation of the evidence is most likely to be true. So we can't test that, right? Because like, you try to do some experiment to see whether simplicity is a good criterion of theory choice. So you do the experiment, and then how do you interpret the results of that experiment?
mm.
Like, do you take the simplest explanation? So the
I
simplest
mean, maybe
explanation is that
yeah.
simpler explanations are more likely to be true. Um,
I mean, maybe this all does start in a way with Hume, because we have Hume's fork, what it's become known as, where Hume says, either your beliefs are so let me see, either your beliefs are justified by experience, or they're just sort of trivial. He thought of a priori truths just kind of trivial. And he famously said, everything else should be cast to the flames. A bit sort of
yeah,
dramatic. All right, calm
right.
down.
Yeah.
But
At which
anyway,
point you should
and
throw
then
his own books into the flames, right?
and then you get this sort of same binary with the logical positivists, right? Where they say,
Yeah.
truths are either kind of trivial or they're justified by science, they're verifiable. And the thing is, that is now almost universally rejected. I mean, even this idea that a priori truths are trivial, I think most people think, I mean, they're obvious, but most people think, there isn't a clear sense of what that's supposed to mean, that they're trivial or not substantial. And just more generally, logical positivism is, pretty much universally rejected. I mean, I remember, just to throw in there, I remember
Among
when I
philosophers.
was at high school doing philosophy, the vivid experience of being told one central problem with logical positivism, that it's self-defeating, that its central principle, that all statements have to be verifiable or they're meaningless or they're trivial, cannot itself be verified, and so sort of undermines itself. I remember thinking, oh my god, the power of philosophy to sort of that we
Yeah.
can work that out just through careful thought. But the problem is, I think, a lot of scientists and the public kind of haven't got the memo because, no one really knows what philosophy is anymore. No one really cares what philosophers think. And so, we in a way, philosophers of science have kind of moved on from this, and yet we still as a culture have this kind of scientistic picture of things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just I think it's just it's going to take time, isn't it? Well, we'll get there
Yeah.
eventually. These things take time. Maybe this is the adolescent period, and
Well,
we're
there's
going to
some,
come out of
yeah,
it.
there's some irony, right? Because it was basically philosophers who taught positivist doctrines to scientists, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
which kind of carries the lesson that philosophy itself is kind of pointless, right? Because
Yeah.
like the philosophers are not doing any experiments, so we're not discovering any real substantive truths. So why should you listen to the philosophers? So okay, let's ignore the philosophers, and then later the philosophers figure out, oh wait, we were wrong about that. Okay, but nobody's listening to us anymore. So
Well, the case of quantum mechanics is interesting, I think, because in the early days of quantum mechanics in the 20s, actually the scientists were philosophically informed, right? And this kind of anti-realism that became dominant in quantum mechanics, the Copenhagen interpretation, roughly that you don't ask what's going on in reality. That's not real science, right? That was kind of the philosophy of the time. People like Mach, they were influenced by. Now, the philosophy has moved on from that. I don't think that kind of positivism, that kind of scientific attitude is not popular anymore, is almost universally rejected. But now the scientists aren't so informed about the philosophy, so they're ironically stuck in this kind of 80-year-old philosophical paradigm and stuck with this bloody
yeah,
stupid Copenhagen thing
right,
that's
yeah.
not
So
even a
yeah, it's
hypothesis.
almost universally rejected among philosophers, but not among scientists, right?
Right,
Or
right, yeah.
sort of like ordinary people who weren't trained in philosophy. Yeah. By the way, like I don't know how much your listeners know, about what this is that we're talking about, right? But yeah, so David Hume thought that there were two kinds of statements that you might know or try to know, which were relations of ideas and matters of
Yeah,
fact.
yeah.
And like the relations of ideas are what we now call analytic. So these are things that you could know just by thinking about, and you don't need to make observations. And they're thought to be necessarily true. And also, he thought that they're true by definition, or they're made true by the meanings of the words, or made true by the it's called relations of ideas because it's made true by the relationships between your concepts. Okay, and then the matters of fact are the opposite in all those things. Like you need observation to know whether it's true, and it's contingent. It could have been true or could have not been true. And okay, and it's made true by the things in the world. And then we figured out that this distinction isn't really correct. Like there are synthetic a priori truths. Immanuel Kant figured that out, or figured that out, so to speak. But it remained or became controversial in the 20th century, where these positivists were thinking, no, they're like going back to Hume, there's no synthetic a priori. Okay, but by the way, even the analytic truths, so they're the things that are said to be true by definition. And then the claim is that like the positivists were okay with those things existing because they're not substantive, or they're not really they're not claims about the world. They're only claims about word meanings or claims about our concepts. Like even that claim is like hard to make out, right? So
Exactly. Exactly, yeah.
W.V. Quine's one correct article was "Truth by Convention," in which he points out why
Yes.
it is not correct that these things are made true by conventions. So like all bachelors are unmarried. You might think, oh, that's just made true by the meaning of the word bachelor. Okay, now there's a sense in which every statement is made true by the meanings of the words in it. which is that if you imagine changing the meanings of the words, then you can have the sentence come out being false. Okay. So there are 8 planets in the solar system is false if you change the meaning of the word planet. But that's not an analytic truth, right? Like that's an empirical truth. Okay. And so, okay. And then it's also true, all bachelors are unmarried can come out false if you change the meaning of the word bachelor. That does not mean that it's true in virtue of the meanings of words in any sense stronger than every sentence is true in virtue of the meanings of words. And every sentence is true in virtue of the actual facts and not the meanings of words in a sense, which is that once you fix the meanings of the words, um, you know, it's either true or false, independent of us. Okay. So once you fix the meaning of the word bachelor, all bachelors are unmarried is necessarily true. And once you fix the meaning of the word planet and 8 and the other words in the sentence, we have no choice about the fact that there are 8 planets in the solar system. So anyway, okay. But anyway, so like, it's hard to even make out the claim that there are these things that are made true by the meanings of words. But anyway, there are synthetic a priori truths, which are not true in virtue of the meanings of words. So, nothing can be completely green and completely red at the same time. Okay. And then, if you want like, that's a necessary truth. And then if you're a positivist, the positivists probably don't want to deny that we know that. So they probably want to claim, oh, I don't know, it's analytic. But then how do you make that out? Like, so tell me what the definition of red is, right? And there is no definition of it. So then it appears that you're stymied at the first stage, right? It's like, to show that it's analytic, what you have to do is substitute in the definitions of red and green and then derive a truth of logic, right? Like after doing the substitution, derive the sentence from just the laws of formal logic. And you obviously cannot do this.
Oh, Mike, we agree too much. This is too much of love, and I imagine that this is incredibly enjoyable. I imagine my moral anti-realist friends Lance Bush or Mark O'Brien are going to be sitting here fuming, going, "Oh no, you're both wrong." And just to say, I am going to at some point to those listeners have people on who disagree with me, but I just want to add a couple of points to support what you've just said. I feel like Hume and then later the logical positivists, they didn't believe they didn't agree with Plato that, mathematical intuition reveals this realm of abstract objects outside of space and time, numbers and sets and things. They didn't believe that because they thought, well, we can just reduce these to kind of trivial, logical, analytic truths. And of course, there was a big project early 20th century, people like Frege and Russell to try and reduce mathematics to logic. Of course, but big problems emerged. For example, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, right? That we can't generate the axioms of basic arithmetic algorithmically, one big problem. So, once we take that into account, it's far from obvious that we can reduce mathematics to logic. But secondly, and this connects to what you've just said, even if we can, I think I want to say the law of non-contradiction is a substantive truth about reality, that that reality can't be contradictory. I think that is a substantive truth. I think it's like a law of nature, like the laws of physics. It's just that it's necessarily true rather than contingently true. But I think of it as a substantive truth about how reality is constrained. And, I get the intuition, and it's just obvious, isn't it? It's just, okay, it's obvious. It's really familiar and really obvious that, you can't have someone that, like, what's an example of a contradiction? Someone who feels pain and only pain, and someone who doesn't feel any pain at all, the same individual. You can't, I don't know, reality can't be contradictory. It's so obvious, but so what? It's still a truth about reality. It's not made true by the meanings of words. What are the meanings of words that makes it true that you can't have contradictory statements? That's not a linguistic convention. It's something that's forced on us. So I don't think we can get around this fact that there are substantive facts we know, again, independently of science. For example,
Yeah, yeah.
the truths of mathematics
Yeah.
and logic.
I mean,
But yeah,
what people would say is, oh, well, so it's, yeah, you can't have true contradictions because of the meaning of the word contradiction, right? Like, for two things to be contradictory means that they can't both be true. So you're just saying if two things can't both be true, then they can't both be true. Okay. Um, right. But so, it can't be raining and not raining at the same time. And people would say that's true because of the meaning of not, right? Like the
yeah,
meaning
yeah,
of not in not raining is such as to exclude the possibility where it's raining. Okay. But the thing is, like, that's just sort of like reiterating why it's true. Okay, but okay, is it true in virtue of the meanings of words? So, all right, so I just said what I thought the positivists or whatever David Hume would say. Okay, but now, here's a question: like, if there were no language, um, could it could there be things? Could there be states where it was raining and not raining? Could it be raining and not raining if human language didn't exist? No, it could not. Right?
yeah, yeah.
The sentence "it's raining" wouldn't exist. Okay, but I'm not asking about the sentence. I'm asking about the state of affairs, right? The state of affairs where it's raining and also not raining. Could both of those states of affairs exist if we all die, and so there's no human language anymore? Will contradictions start happening? Will things be raining and not raining at the same time? No. Okay, so it's not dependent on language. So it's not a fact about our language, right? Our language, the conventions of our language determine what fact I'm pointing to when I say these words. Okay. But once you identify the fact that I'm pointing to, that fact doesn't depend upon the words. Okay. That's the point of what I'm doing. But, and you kept saying like, oh, it's a substantive truth, but it's difficult to even say what substantive means.
Yeah.
Apart from contingent. You're like, right? Because like the sense that it's non-substantive is sort of like, well, you didn't tell me anything, you didn't give me any new information, but you
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
give me any by saying. There's like this comment by Wittgenstein where he says, I know nothing about the weather, for example, when I know that either it rains or it doesn't. Okay, but like that statement is really close to just saying it's a priori and necessary, right? Which all the
Yeah.
rationalists think. They all think that
Yeah,
these
yeah.
things are a priori necessary truths, right? So, like, they're not giving me any new information in the sense that I could have known that by just thinking about it. I didn't need you to tell me that. um, okay, but that's just saying
Yeah.
a priori. So, anyway,
Yeah, I remember, I mean, a very important formative moment in my life, my philosophical career, was turning up at, again, the University of Reading, where I did my graduate study. And there was this professor, Professor Gayden Strawson, who had all the same views as me, and not just the panpsychism. So that was one important thing, the panpsychism. Also, opposition to Humeanism about, or what's called Humeanism, about causation, that there's no causation at the fundamental level. And finally, this idea that logic is in some sense part of reality, part of the structure of reality. And it was so life-changing because when I studied my undergraduate degree in Leeds, like none of the professors shared my views. We actually read David Chalmers when I was an undergraduate. I did philosophy of mind course every year, and we didn't read any anti-physicalists. I don't think. Maybe we probably did the knowledge argument. Um, and I thought I then had an illusionist phase. I had an moral anti-realist phase because I just thought, I must be wrong. Who am I? All of these experts disagree with me. So it was really life changing oh wow, this professor agrees with me, and I suddenly began to get confidence in my views. Let's try and we're agreeing a lot. Let's try and raise something on the other side of the debate. So I imagine our opponents might press, for example, the epistemology, right? We're saying there are these fundamental moral truths, right? In this sort of timeless Platonic realm, independent of the physical world. They might say, justifiably, I think, well, how the hell do you know about them? Right? Like if how we know about things in the physical world through our senses, right? That light bounces off things, goes in our eyes. That's how we know what's going on around us. Then we can do experiments and stuff.
yes,
Now, if there are this independent realm of moral truths, and we know about them at least to an extent. We have some correct moral judgments. Surely they must be impacting on our brains in some way, in the way the physical world. If the physical world didn't impact on our brains, we wouldn't know about it. So surely the realm of moral truths must be impacting on our brains in some way if we're to make sense of knowing about it. And that does seem a bit weird. And just before I hand over to you to answer, I actually do find this is something I get a little bit annoyed about with a lot of other fellow um, strong realists about morality. I feel they often just kind of don't deal with this question, or just sort of dodge it, say kind of not very plausible things to try and dodge the issue. I think we need to face up to it. We do need to tell some sort of story about how these fundamental moral truths impact us. And that is
Yeah.
a real challenge. What do you think?
Um, yeah. How do the moral truths impact us? They don't really impact us. They don't cause things in the physical world, I don't think. In fact, I'm unsure whether you should say this, okay? But I'm unsure about whether moral truths cause things in the same way that I'm unsure about whether mathematical truths cause anything. If they do cause anything, it would be only through our consciousness, right? So if the moral truth causes something, the only thing it causes is us to have beliefs about it. And similarly about mathematical truths. So there's the fact that 2 is less than 3. Okay, and the 2 is an abstract object and 3 is an abstract object. So the relationships between these abstract objects are not physical facts, and so they can't cause anything in the physical world. And so, so how could we know about them? Right. And so, you should conclude from this that it's not a condition on knowledge that you causally interact with things. And okay, and then so that's not a condition for moral knowledge either. Okay, so what do you need to have knowledge? You need to have a justified true belief, and maybe with no defeaters, right? And
Right.
defeaters, in this context, defeaters are true facts out there that, if added to your beliefs, would undermine or remove your justification for believing the thing in question. So, okay, so the way that I know moral truths is that I've got justification for believing them. Some of the things are true, and they're just necessarily true. There's no further grounding required. It's just necessary truth, like the truths of mathematics. And I have beliefs, and they're justified because it's reasonable to assume that things are the way they appear, unless you have reason for thinking otherwise. And so when I think about some moral propositions, they seem obvious to me, and I don't have any specific grounds for doubt. Okay, and I don't have any defeaters, or at least like. And then, I could respond to alleged defeaters that people bring up, right? But just the fact that there's no causal interaction, I think that doesn't count, right?
We finally have a disagreement, perhaps then, because that doesn't seem satisfactory to me. Maybe there's a good paper on this. I've forgotten the name of the authors now. I'll put it below the video. I'll link to it below the video. But they give this kind of analogy to press that we have to give more of an explanation of moral facts somehow impacting on us. Okay, so here's the analogy. Suppose Jane has a strong belief in God, right? And she bases that on, it seems to her God exists. Maybe she has religious experience, and it seems overwhelming to her that God exists. Then one day she meets Agent Smith and finds out actually she's in the Matrix, and she's completely persuaded of this. And Agent Smith says to her, "Oh, the reason you have this strong intuition that God exists and these religious experiences is when we were designing the Matrix, we discovered that the only way we could kind of keep it stable is if people have a strong belief in a deity. So we set things up to ensure that people have strong intuitive sense that God exists and strong religious experiences." Okay, and let's say she's completely persuaded of this. What should she now do with her belief in God? I think that she has a defeater there essentially, because she finds out that her belief in God was shaped by something completely separate from God, right? It wasn't, its existence has nothing to do with God. It was created just by the constructors of the Matrix completely independently. Now, if we don't say more about the moral case, I worry we have a similar situation with our moral judgments. I mean, this is closely connected to Sharon Street's debunking arguments. If my moral judgments are just completely shaped by evolution or brain processes or whatever they're shaped by, if it's independent of the moral truths, and I know there's this complete story of what shaped my moral beliefs that doesn't involve the moral facts doing anything, well, then it seems to me I have a defeater. I should doubt my moral beliefs. It's like that the analogy. It's like finding out my belief in God was caused by something completely separate from God. So I think we do have to tell. I mean, here's just before I hand over to you. I mean, here's one possible story. It's not a story I accept, but it just to make clear how you could tell such a story. If you believe in God and you think, God knows all the moral truths because God's omniscient and God has guided evolution to ensure we have largely correct moral intuitions. Okay, now you've done the job. Now you've told a story of why we have our moral beliefs that brings in the moral truths and makes sense of how the moral truths have influenced via God indirectly, but how the moral truths have influenced our moral judgments. Now, I don't accept that story of us. I do believe in some kind of God, but not this kind of micromanaging deity. But we have to say something about how the moral facts influence us. Otherwise, I think it's a defeater. I think we should. I agree with Sharon Street that in that case we should give up our moral judgments. What do you think?
Um, I mean, like in your story, the person gets the defeater from Agent Smith telling them this stuff, but that didn't happen to us in reality. Like we didn't actually find out that our beliefs were caused by something other than the moral facts, right? Um, okay, and then you might think, oh no, because we just know that these moral facts are non-physical, and therefore they couldn't have any causal powers. So we know that whatever explains our moral beliefs, it has to be something other than the facts. Okay, but then why wouldn't that argument also show that you don't know any other necessary, you don't know any of the a priori necessary truths? And you shouldn't think that because then you're going to undermine your entire belief system. And you don't, and as we were discussing earlier, you don't get to scientific beliefs without some a priori input. Okay. Okay. Now, but I do think that. Okay, so this is sort of like, oh, that didn't really answer why it counts as knowledge. That's just saying like you don't want to say that it's not knowledge because you're going to have maybe a self-defeating and just totally implausible belief system. Okay, and so yeah, just in epistemology, we want to say more about why it counts. Why it counts as knowledge. So to count as knowing something, your belief has to be correct, and it has to be not just an accident that it was correct. And then there's this argument that, well, it would be just an accident if there's no causal connection. Okay, but the the argument that you can make along those lines for other kinds of propositions is a little bit different. Like if when you get pulled out of the matrix and they say, the reason why you thought that you had a cat was that we stimulated your brain directly to produce this cat simulation. Okay, so then you should probably not think that there really was a cat. Like while you were sitting there in the matrix, there
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
was
yeah.
really a cat in front of you. Okay, but
Sure.
that is a little bit different because there being a cat in front of you is a contingent proposition. And you can easily conceive of the world in which there's no cat in front of you. But when you try to imagine the world in which and they tell you, oh, also we stimulated you to think that 2 + 2 is 4, and then you think, oh, so maybe in the real world 2 + 2 isn't 4. No, you don't think that because it's a necessary truth, and there's no conceivable way that it could not be 4. Okay, so the necessity has something to do with it. The fact that you can't really imagine another way. And as far as you can tell, if you're thinking at all, you have to some degree trust your reason. As far as you can tell, there is no way for this thing not to be true. And I think that is similar to, 2 plus 2 being 5 is similar to um, suffering being pro tanto good, right?
Okay, good. So part of what you're saying is, well, there's a relevant difference here because it's necessary truths. But actually, that's why I think the analogy that I gave is good, because God is supposed to exist necessarily. So if God exists in all possible worlds. So it would be relevantly similar if the belief is true, then it couldn't have been false because God exists necessarily.
Uh,
But I agree with you. Just another point. Yeah, I do agree with you that we have to say something analogous in the mathematical or logical case too, right? It's if I'm saying in order to make sense of our moral knowledge, we have to make sense of moral facts impacting on us in some way, then I have to say the same about mathematics and logic as well. I'm prepared to accept that. So I'm going to kind of run your analogy the other way, right? So you're saying, okay, mathematics and morality go together, and of course, in the mathematical case, maybe numbers aren't going to impact our brains. So in the morality case as well, we don't have to say goodness is kind of impacting our brains. I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to say no. In both cases, we have to say, in some sense, these facts, the moral facts or the mathematical facts, are impactors. So can I just share with you and see what you think? What I'm so early days thinking about a paper on this, maybe a kind of radical view trying to make sense of this. So, I mean, I guess the problem with the epistemology here is the Platonic realm that we're talking about is always conceived totally separate. It's always kind of very dualistic thinking. There's the physical world on one hand, and Platonic reality, the Platonic realm of numbers and morality on the other hand. Maybe what we have to go for is maybe there's a more intimate connection between these two realms. Okay, so here's roughly what I'm thinking of. Very early days. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. So maybe there's just one fundamental Platonic entity, something like what Plato called the form of the good. Plato, the idea there's this one fundamental entity in this Platonic realm, the form of the good. Okay, so we've got the form of the good, and it's the ultimate ground of moral truth. Okay. But it's not just totally separate from the physical universe. Maybe it partly constitutes the physical universe. Maybe the form of the good is necessarily such that it essentially constitutes every contingent entity, including my mind, including my conscious states. Okay, so that's the hypothesis I'm considering. One additional thing, I independently think, as many anti-physicalists do, that we have direct access to the essential nature of our conscious states. This is a thesis sometimes known as revelation. Nothing religious, just
Not
and this is
religious.
not supposed to be. What's that?
Not the religious kind of revelation, just
Not the
yeah.
religious kind of revelation. I'm open to that as well, but that we have, and this is not supposed to be anything too mysterious. The idea is just pain, for example, is sort of essentially defined by how it feels, and how it feels when you feel it. You're directly aware of how it feels, so you have direct access to its essential nature. Okay, so if I have direct access to my mind and my conscious states, and my mind and my conscious states are in some way partly constituted by the form of the good, then maybe I also have direct access to the form of the good. And this grounds my moral knowledge, maybe my mathematical knowledge as well. And just very finally, it's striking that this starts to sound similar to what people claim in mystical experiences, right? In mystical experiences, people have this sense that they're in not only in direct contact with ultimate reality, but that they are partly constituted by ultimate reality. Um, but maybe there's a theoretical reason here to take these things seriously. We have to make sense of mathematical knowledge. I would say we have to make sense of value knowledge too. maybe this hypothesis about a more intimate connection between the Platonic realm and the physical universe can help us make sense of that. What do you think, Mike? Am I completely
Well,
correct?
um, I well, I found it hard to understand this view. So,
Fair
right, so
enough.
like,
I'm putting you on the spot there.
right, like I don't see in what way. Well, first, like I don't see how there could be only one platonic object. Like, okay, well, there's infinitely many numbers; those are all platonic objects. Okay, and then, although you didn't say there was only one, you said there was one fundamental one. So that has to be that somehow the form of the good the um, is the ground for all the other forms. But I just don't see how that would be true. Okay, but also maybe that wasn't really essential because the thing that we were talking about, like the important part, was um, where the Platonic objects partly constitute everything else, and then I just didn't understand how that would be true, or even what that means. Right. So like, maybe you have to say more about that. Oh, but anyway, before you say that, I just want to comment like, we keep talking about how, oh, there's mathematics and there's ethics, but it's not really that. It's not that simple. It's like there are universals, which are
Mm.
like in metaphysics, universals are things that are repeatable, like could be wholly present in multiple different things. So like there's the property of redness, and there are multiple different things that can be read. Um, so there's redness here and there's redness here. Okay. So the thing that more than one thing could have in common is a universal. Okay. And mathematical objects are a species of universals.
Yeah.
Also, wrongness and rightness, those are species of universals. But there's also like redness and greenness and squareness and whatnot, like all these different properties. Okay. So, and then when you realize that, it's not like the stuff that we're saying about ethics is not that weird, right? It's just what we say about everything. What we say about right and wrong is what we say about every property, right? You don't not believe in properties, do you? Right? You're not going to say that nothing
No.
has any properties. So, okay. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to my thing, I don't understand the thing about partly
Okay.
consciousness.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, let me. Unfortunately, running out of time. I'm gonna have to feed some kids. Unfortunately, we're getting to the juicy stuff now, and but let me have one more go at this, and then you can have the last word. So, in response to your 2 points, so firstly, okay, how can there be one fundamental Platonic entity? In the moral case, I was thinking maybe it's a little bit like how Aristotle thought of organisms, that they have a sort of essential teleology. Um, And the problem with that though is that they are, organisms are contingent. They might not have existed. There could have been these different organisms with a very different teleology, maybe. So, but maybe this fundamental Platonic entity, the form of the good that constitutes everything, has its own teleology directed at the good, at pleasure, well-being, understanding, whatever. Um, And so that's the way one entity could have a kind of be the ground of just get basically like virtue ethicists think of things, except as this necessary entity that is the ground of the teleology, essentially. In terms of mathematics, well, maybe if it turned out mathematics was reducible to logic, then maybe we'd have a shoe in here, if that's the right expression, which it might not be. So I earlier sounded like I was maybe dismissing that project of reducing mathematics to logic. It's certainly harder since since Gödel and so on. But there are, for example, what's his name at St Andrews? His name's escaped me now. A very famous philosopher who do try to make sense of a sort of neologicism where we can, in some sense, reduce mathematics to logic. So maybe then you just have to have, the law of non-contradiction, so a smaller set of a smaller set of logical axioms, and maybe they could also be grounded in the nature of this fundamental entity. Okay, I'm talking too long. Your second thing was, what the hell does that mean? That it constitutes my mind? Well, I would ask you to read some mystics. It might help that this does seem to be a pervasive factor in many different religious cultures. This experience of this seeming Europe for seemings. For people having these experiences, it seems more true than their ordinary experiences. But I mean, what there doesn't seem to be anything contradictory about that statement that there's just some entity that is a partial constituent of another entity. Um,
Yes.
what that seems a fairly clear statement. Um, what's the problem?
Okay.
I can't
Okay.
believe you don't agree with me.
Right. Well, but I mean, it's weird that when the two entities are of different metaphysical categories, that you'd say that one of them constitutes the other. Now, okay. Oh, so when you were saying that stuff about maybe like maybe the form of the good has a telos, and I thought no, the universals don't have teloi. Uh, Nothing does except for conscious beings. Aristotle was completely wrong. His view of the world and like his science and his philosophy are all tied together. It's all tied together with natural teleology, the idea that things have ends built into them. And that's just completely wrong. And we found that out in modern science. Teleology is, except there's one exception, which is that conscious beings sometimes really do have goals, but non-conscious entities never have goals. Anyway, okay, but then I thought, actually, there is a way that there could be one fundamental abstract object. And I remembered there were these people called the resemblance nominalists who, they were trying to get rid of abstract objects. And they were saying, like, things don't really have something in common. It's just that things resemble each other to a certain degree. And then we group things together because they resemble each other. Okay. And then David Armstrong's response to that is resemblance is a universal. Right? Because there can be multiple instances of resemblance. Like these two things resemble each other and these other two things resemble each other. So resemblance is a universal. Okay. But then I thought, so if you're okay with there being one universal, it could be resemblance, right? Which makes
Right.
sense because universals are by definition what multiple things can have in common. And like you might try to explain all cases of things having something in common as the things resembling each other. So okay, but anyway, but then you get to the point of, maybe the abstract objects partly constitute us. And that's weird because they're abstract. I'm not abstract. I'm a particular concrete thing. So it's weird that that partly constitutes me. Okay, but like, it does have, like the abstract objects have connections to the concrete objects. It's not just like completely separate, unrelated realms. So when there are two fingers, that's an instance of the universal two. Right? And like, okay, and so like, the characteristics of the universals are just inherently connected to the characteristics of the thing. Okay, there are two fingers here, and then there are three fingers here, and because this instantiates two and this one instantiates three, that means there are more fingers here than there are here, and those are just inherently connected, right? Okay, so I don't know. This maybe has something to do with why you can't just like hypothesize that maybe the actual facts about the abstract world are completely different from what we think, right? Like that doesn't really make sense. Now you can try to think of tests, like, think of a test for a mathematical truth. We're gonna like put two things in a box and then put another two things in the box, then we're gonna count the things in the box and it's going to be four. Okay, maybe that's a test. That is subject to the empirical assumption that things don't, like, one of them will not pop into existence, another one will not pop into existence, or one of them won't disappear or something like that. Okay, but subject to that empirical assumption, then counting tests whether 2 + 2 is 4. Okay, but like the reason why we don't usually think of that as empirical evidence is that a priori how it has to come out. Okay, but like if somebody didn't know how it has to come out, then maybe that would be informative for them. Like the person couldn't see intuitively, then doing this experiment of counting would help them.
Hmm.
Okay, but so like the idea that there's no empirical test of it is tied in with the idea that we already know, right? Like we know the truths about these things. Um, and so like for us, there is no alternative. There's no alternative way that the experiment could come out such that it would actually refute 2 + 2 = 4. Like if you do the counting and you get 5, then either another one came into existence, not one of the ones that you put in the box, or you miscounted. And like we know a priori that those are the only possibilities. Um, so that's why we don't count it as a test.
I'm gonna put in the accompanying description to this video a very short 1 minute amusing video of someone trying to empirically demonstrate the 2 plus 2 is 5 rather than 4. And people can watch that if they want. I'm itching to say more, but unfortunately, I have objective moral obligations to feed some children.
Yeah, why don't you just throw
And,
them out the window?
that's a necessary fact about reality. What was that, sorry?
You could just throw them out the window instead of feeding them, and
That's, that's a good point. I'll just do that. Should we carry on?
it's
No,
possible, but that would
unfortunately,
be immoral. Yeah,
it's part of the necessary structure of reality that I have these obligations, and so it can't be avoided.
yeah,
Or
fair point.
and if I do, I'll go to hell. So that's I don't really believe in hell. Okay, we could go on all night. People should. I'm going to ask you if you want to say anything more before we finish about you, or we're checking out your stuff or whatever. Mike's wonderful philosophy all over the place. The only other interaction we've had, people should check out. Is so Mike's a wonderful philosopher, largely right about so many things. He unfortunately does have largely false political views, and we had a little bit of a debate about that on Amos Woolen's YouTube channel on the nature of taxation. How could you resist a 2 hour discussion on the nature of taxation? So people should check that out. Check out Amos's stuff. He's also very good, really wonderful philosopher, even though he's only about 12 or something. Yes, so that's all I have to say. Would you anything you want to say? Do you want recommend people
Uh,
follow
yeah,
you up in any way?
check out my blog, Fake News, on Substack,
Oh yeah,
FAKENOUS at
that
Substack.
is such a cool
Okay, and
name. Fake news.
also buy all of my books. Go to Amazon and get my 12 books.
Yes, you filthy capitalist.
Yeah,
Actually,
just give me more
I'm not.
money.
Yes. So yeah, do subscribe to Mike's excellent Substack, but subscribe to mine first. I'm built. He's been doing it longer than me. I've got fewer followers. Subscribe to mine first. Okay, thank you so much, Mike. It's been it's been a really fun, as always, conversation. Be good.
I'll try. Thanks. If indeed goodness exists, I will try to instantiate it.